What's up, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Still Curtain Podcast. I'm your host, Tommy Jaggi, editor of StillCurtain.com, and joining me, as always, is Still Curtain contributor Shayne Kubas. Shayne, you were off vacationing last week. Glad to have you back. It was busy around the 4th. We took a week off of the podcast, but we are back now and ready to rehash some of this Jalen Ramsey trade stuff, fallout here, if you will, and give it a grade. I want to talk about how it impacts the Steelers, which players are most impacted by that, Shayne. We're also going to talk about the latest rankings kind of getting slow revealed by ESPN. These networks kind of try to drag that kind of stuff out this time of year, but it is interesting stuff because it is executives, coaches, and scouts who are grading these positions and ranking the top 10 players at each position. We're going to talk about where Cam and TJ Watt fall into that category. There's only been several positions released so far. And we're also, at the end of today's show, our last segment, we are going to grade the biggest and boldest moves of the Steelers 2025 offseason. So stay with us for that. Should be fun. Shayne, let's start with the news this week. And we'll start with yesterday's news as we're recording this right now. Cam Hayward was ranked as the 10th best defensive tackle by executives, coaches, and scouts, according to ESPN. It's a panel of 70 execs, coaches, and scouts that vote on this. And so that seems pretty low compared to the player that we got last year. We saw a dominant run defender. We saw a guy that was disruptive, 71 tackles, 8.5 sacks, bunch of plays behind the line of scrimmage, taking on double teams. Like, were they watching the same game as? And I'm not trying to put on my Steelers colored glasses here, but it seemed like there's only a case to be made for 3 or 4 defensive tackles, maybe, that should have been higher than Hayward entering this list. How much do you think they were factoring in his age going into the 2025 season?
I think pretty heavily, and I think that's the issue with this ranking, is that they are baking in like regression. And I understand that, like, under normal circumstances, absolutely you have to account for that. You might even be able to account for that for guys younger than him, right? Like, because he is going to be older than a lot of players in the NFL next year. But I think you and I kind of learned from this last offseason when we were talking about the extension potential and what that's going to look like and should they do it and all. You just shouldn't assume he's going to get worse until he actually does, while also being healthy, right? Because that was the issue in 2023. It was like, okay, well, he's banged up, didn't look like the same guy when he came back, yada, yada. When he was healthy all of last year, there was very few defensive players in the sport better than him, not just at his position, just in the sport. It's just hard to put him anywhere close to 10 unless you're assuming he's going to be significantly worse next year, which maybe he will be finally, but I'm not going to be the one to say that again at this point.
Yeah, no, and I get where you're coming from, because it seems like, 3 years in a row now we're like, all right, Cam's going to take a step back.
He's going to take a step back. It'll be good. But
he's one of those few exceptions, Shayne. It's like him and Calais Campbell right now in the NFL that is just defying father time. It doesn't seem to matter how old you get. Campbell's playing at 38 years old, and Hayward's going to be 36 for the upcoming season. And so, yes, inevitably, at some point, Hayward's going to decline. But like you said, can we bank on it happening? I mean, last year was probably one of his 2 or 3 best seasons of his entire career.
Might have been his best pass rushing season, which doesn't make any sense considering
it's wild,
that aging curve is not good usually. Like, you don't see guys stick around as like pass rushers this long. Maybe they can stick around as like run defenders or whatever, but to be as effective as he was as a pass rusher, it all comes down ultimately to his strength. We all know that's what it is. Like, as he does slowly lose a step or two, it matters, but it also kind of doesn't, because I feel like a lot of offensive linemen, especially in the interior, are getting kind of lighter in some cases and a little bit more, agile, and guys who are going to be able to pass protect a little bit better, but they can't handle his power. So then they end up getting pushed back into the pocket. And I think that actually might allow him to play longer, not just as a run defender, but as a pass defender too. So it might be a minute before he actually slows down at this point.
Yeah, Shayne, and this guy, we're talking about Cam Hayward, who was 295 pounds at Ohio State, as a base 4-3 defensive end back when he came out. Steelers transitioned him, and he's a big dude. Like that. I'd like to ask him, like, I'd like somebody to ask him that question. What do you play at these days? Like,
it's got to be the
330s. He's big. He's big. And I think it's that speed, or it's not the speed, the power that helps him, because he's not the same athlete he was, but he is as strong as ever. And maybe pound for pound the strongest defensive lineman. Dexter Lawrence
Might
is up
be.
there. There's
Lawrence
a
is
couple of
definitely
really
up there.
strong guys.
He does have weight on
No
him no matter
disrespect.
what his playing weight is, though, too. So, like, there's that.
And for what it's worth, Shayne, Cam Hayward graded out as the second best interior defender in the NFL last year next to Chris Jones. Obviously, Dexter Lawrence was having a phenomenal season as a DPOY candidate, and then he got injured.
Right.
Same player. But yeah, I think 10 is too low. He was one spot away there from just being an honorable mention. And what a slap in the face that would be.
Yeah.
You just had, he was first team All-Pro, and then he's not even hardly inside the top 10. So
yeah,
I find that one a little bit interesting, considering some of the other names that were on the list. Younger guys, obviously good football players like
right.
and Jeffrey Simmons, but Hayward's season last year was a lot better than anybody's given it credit for.
Yeah.
I think that if I had to guess, Shayne, these execs and coaches are looking ahead to 2025 season and saying, yeah, I don't think this is repeatable. That's the only conclusion I can come to with that.
Yeah, and again, fair under normal circumstances, right? Like if this was someone else who hadn't already been doing the same thing for like 3 years in a row of beating the aging curve, I might be more inclined to agree with the idea of like, let's push some of these younger guys up, guys who have also played really well in recent seasons, and we'll temper expectations for the 36-year-old. I don't think you can really do that at this point with him.
Yeah,
I think you have to just say like, all right, Cam Hayward is Cam Hayward until he's not. And then when he is not, we'll talk about it. And that's kind of where I'm at with him, right? And again, we are Steelers fans. We're hoping that's the case. But I also think that's really the only conclusion you can come to at this point in time.
It's almost like the Steelers' perennial 9+ win
season. Cam Hayward's just going to be still Cam Hayward.
It doesn't happen until you don't get that non-losing season. We shouldn't be betting on it to happen. And I feel the same way about Cam as well.
Pretty much.
All right. Let's move from Cam discussion to TJ Watt, who the edge rusher rankings were released by those execs, coaches, and scouts per Jeremy Fowler's ESPN. As of Wednesday morning when we were recording this show, TJ Watt ranked second, Shayne.
Yeah.
And so there's been a lot of fodder with the edge rushers, particularly TJ Watt this offseason because of the looming contract extension and even trade talks out there, which is not going to happen. But there's been so much talk surrounding this edge group, and we're in a kind of a generational edge rusher talent group. I mean, there's multiple Hall of Famers that are going to go down someday in this group that's playing in the NFL right now. And so Watt was ranked number 2, which if you listen to a lot of the national media and what a lot of the analytics will tell you, and Brandon Thorne, and there's a lot of guys out there, and no disrespect to them, I think that they do a tremendous job. Analytics should always be taken into consideration. It's like evaluation as part of the pie, and analytics is a piece of that pie. But execs and coaches just told you what they think of TJ Watt. They think that he is second only to Myles Garrett in the NFL in terms of overall edge rushers. That includes phenomenal football players like Micah Parsons, Nick Bosa, Aiden Hutchinson.
And it's interesting because I think those guys that you mentioned, the Brandon Thorns of the world, the other national media, and guys who just they look at more of the underlying metrics for a lot of this stuff, right? Those metrics do mean a lot to this position, especially now because you do see a lot of outlier seasons from guys, right? Where like, how do you explain a 14 sack season from a guy who didn't really make a ton of plays, but when he did, they were sacks, right? Like those types of things. And I think that's good for like looking ahead for players' careers, like a guy who maybe comes out of nowhere with a huge season, but the pressure numbers aren't very good. He doesn't win that often, but when he did win, it almost always resulted in a big play, right? That's really good for that type of stuff. TJ's been doing this for almost a decade in a row without ever having like truly elite metrics in those regards, like pass rush win rate or any of that stuff. At some point, it doesn't matter anymore when you're always making the plays anyway. And I think that's why the national media will tell you one thing and why coaches and execs will tell you another thing, because the media can point to all those things and say, well, if you look at this, this, and this, he's actually X-rated player, right? The coaches and execs play him every year, right? Like they have to deal with him every season. And the thing that separates TJ from a lot of the guys that might have more raw pass rushing numbers or might have more raw, like significant metrics in those regards, is he just always makes key plays and big plays at a higher rate than anyone else in the sport. No one has more sacks than him since he came in the league. No one has more tackles for loss than him since he came in the league. No one has more forced fumbles. No one plays the run at the level that he does at the edge position. Like, all those things matter to coaches, especially because they look across the aisle and they're like, I don't want that dude on the field in the fourth quarter when the game's on the line. And that matters to a lot of those guys, more so than what was his pass rush win rate, how often did he get to the quarterback on like a rate basis. And it doesn't make those things matter less. It just means that TJ is kind of an anomaly in that regard, especially under current circumstances with how we look at metrics.
Yeah, 100%. And you said it well, Shayne. And again, this is no slap in the face to any of these metrics. I think that they're all important.
Matter.
They help tell the whole story, because Watt wasn't the most consistent edge rusher on a down-to-down basis last year. He was the most frequently chipped per the latest PFF data that we have. And that matters, because when you're getting your pass rush disrupted as frequently as he did, it's going to impact your efficiency. And Steelers, Terrell Austin, you can point the finger at him if you want to for refusing to move the guy around.
Factor that in too.
Now he could have done more when chipped. He could have done more when double teamed. 100% agree with that. And that's why when these rankings came out, Shayne, if Parsons would have been higher, if Nick Bosa would have been higher, even if Trey Hendrickson would have been higher, Aiden Hutchinson, I would have understood that. But coaches are telling you what they think of TJ Watt, the guy that they have to game plan against, the guy that they're sending the attention to. They know how he can wreck a game, and it only takes a couple of plays. You don't need to do it you don't need to get in the backfield as consistently as someone if you make a lot more splash plays. And I like to give out the analogy, Shayne. This would kind of be like if you were comparing NFL cornerbacks and you're looking at how effective they are in man coverage, how effective they are in zone, but you disregard any of their splash play ability, their ability to get past deflections, their ability to take the football away, which some cornerbacks have done in recent years as many as 11 times, like we saw Trayvon Diggs do. That stuff is extremely valuable. So if you eliminate that part of TJ Watt, I would agree that he shouldn't be ranked that high, but that stuff matters. And those are game-changing plays. I think, to the forced fumble that he had, stacking and shedding, the double team. What was that, Houston? I can't remember what game that was.
I forget.
It was at the 1 yard line, jars the ball loose, recovers his own fumble.
I think, wasn't it?
Okay.
Raiders, I think.
That's right. And then you're talking about like a 14-point swing that those type of plays end up being. And so that stuff matters. You can't take it away. And yes, the other stuff, especially in recent days, looks the flashiest for sure. You want to have the consistent pressures. You want to be able to have the high pass rush win rate, the high double team rate, all that, and succeed doing so. But the NFL just told you what they thought of TJ Watt, and they still have him ranked second, which I think is respectable based on the career that we've seen from him. I think it would not surprise me at all, Shayne, if he's got a fire lit under him this season after having that slow finish in December, and he comes out of the gate swinging, is a top 2 or 3 DPOY candidate again, because that's kind of what he's been every year that he's been healthy.
Right. And I think the other thing you have to factor in is like this wasn't a list of the best pass rushers in the NFL, right? They're specifically talking about, one, just edges, which, you're taking out interior players, and then 2, like edge rusher, not just edge pass rusher, right? If you factor in everything that an edge is asked to do, it makes it a lot easier to put TJ above some guys that do have more raw pass rushing ability and more raw pass rushing numbers, because look at what he did against the run last year. I mean, it was ridiculous at times, but he was completely caving in offensive line somehow, despite not being a bigger player. Teams consistently run away from him more than any other edge in the league, from what I've seen. Like, that stuff matters too, right? Like, you put Garrett up there because he's such a productive pass rusher the past couple of years, why he's the number 1 for them. But he is also getting a little bit better as a run defender, I think, over the course of his career, but he's nowhere near what TJ is in that regard. So it does help kind of bridge that gap between him and some of the other guys. So.
Yeah, and according to ESPN Analytics, TJ Watt had a 19% pass rush win rate last year. That compares to 22% for Myles Garrett, who is undeniably was better. Garrett was better in that regard last year. But you talked about the run defense. That's 40% of the game, Shayne. And so I think that we're almost swinging too far the other way when it comes to our evaluation of these guys.
Yeah.
And for what it's worth, Watt did finish with the 3rd highest edge grade in the NFL per Pro Football Focus last year, 91.7 grade, which is pretty much on par with what he's been every year the last 6 years in the league. Let's move on, and we're going to talk about Jalen Ramsey. If you guys are joining us in the live chat, please drop a question for us, leave a comment. We'd love to hear what you have to say, and we'll get this conversation rolling. Let's break down the Jalen Ramsey-Minkah Fitzpatrick trade. we were not here
Yeah.
last time when all this went down. And
Of
so,
course, right? The first day I'm not here, it's like, oh, by the way, Steelers made another move. It's like, all right, cool.
once you figure that seems to be the way that it works.
Yeah.
So we're going to rehash this now. And by the way, if you were following along on stillcurtain.com, you would have seen a bunch
Plenty
of content
coverage. Yeah,
on this already. But Shayne and I want to share our thoughts again for you now. And so I want to start with, Shayne, what does this trade mean for the Steelers? And just to rehash, it was Jalen Ramsey and Jonnu Smith coming to Pittsburgh for Minkah Fitzpatrick. This also included a day 3 pick swap in 2027, a Steelers 5th rounder for a Dolphins 7th rounder. Minimal draft capital, obviously, especially when you consider what Steelers have to work with this coming draft in 2026. But what did you make of this trade when you first saw it happen?
Well, I'll tell you, I was in the basement area that I'd be sleeping in at my parents' place down in Maryland, where I was spending a week of vacation. And I get the notification on my phone, and I see that we've traded for Jalen Ramsey. That's the first thing I see. I'm like, okay, I didn't expect this to happen, but I do totally understand it. This is probably the best player available on the market that the Steelers could go get. It fills a position of need, whether you view him as a slot corner, as another outside option, however you want to do it, makes sense. And then you see that Minkah is going back the other way, which, first of all, funny, one of the funniest trades of all time, in my opinion, considering the fact we've already done this same thing with them, where like we're giving him back after pretty much using him up as far as his prime goes, sending him back the other way for a player, admittedly, also kind of getting out of his prime, an older player, but still just funny to think about it being Minkah in this case. And we also pick up Jonnu. So I see all this stuff over the course of like an hour or so, all the reporting comes out. And my first thought once I had all the information was, okay, like this is kind of like, it's not a lateral move, but it's closer to a lateral move than I thought adding either of these players would be, because you're giving Minkah back the other way. It's just a very interesting idea for this defense, because I think ultimately, I do think Jalen's the best player that was moved in this deal still. I do think, even though he's a little bit older than Minkah, I think he is the better player at this point. More impactful player, plays a more important position, whether you think of a outside, inside player, or whatever. And you also pick up another useful player in Jonnu Smith. But it also it does make me wonder, like, what exactly are they hoping the defense is going to look like with Minkah no longer there, and how do they kind of account for that without having that true deep safety they've been so accustomed to having? So that was my first kind of thoughts there.
It was interesting. And so if you would have told me that, but coming into the offseason, in a year the Steelers desperately wanted to win, and after signing Aaron Rodgers, that they would still be willing to trade Minkah Fitzpatrick away, I wouldn't have believed it, because it's like, all right, we're all in for the here and now. Now, financially, it made sense. Their cap charges were similar. And what's interesting too, Shayne, is a week before this trade happened, I wrote an article on Still Curtain. It's one that I had saved as a draft. I had it saved as a draft since January, because I'm like, this is something that we need to talk about. And so I kind of kept it on the back burner for the longest time. A week before the trade happened, I finally got this article out there. We got a slow season, got the article out there about how we need to have a painful conversation about Minkah Fitzpatrick, how he's been awesome for the Steelers. 2019, 2020, he was legitimately one of the best safeties in the league, and things have kind of spiraled downhill from there these last 2 seasons. Since the end of 2022, he's got 1 interception, and he's playing deep safety. He's not making the impact that you want him to make. Yes, the Steelers don't give up a lot of big plays, but you're not getting the splash. The price tag was too high. It was just too high. After restructuring his deal, you could not afford, you could not justify, even with his past reputation at all, you could not justify Minkah accounting for $22.5 million against the cap. And then that number was set to go up to $24.5 million next year. And that's why I needed to get that article out there. It's like, this guy is just not worth what the Steelers are going to be, what's going to be costing them financially and against the cap to keep him around. And interestingly, he was traded shortly after that. The Steelers are getting a more versatile player. There's zero doubt in my mind. Like, if you go look at Ramsey's snap counts last year, he played over 700 snaps at outside corner. He played 185 snaps from the slot. He played 99 snaps. I think it was either from the box or as an edge rusher. Like, this guy was moved all over the place. And he at this stage of his career, Shayne, he kind of reminds me a little bit of like Derwin James. Like he's kind of that role where he can cover tight ends, he can play in the slot, he can do a lot of things for you. And I think that's more advantageous in today's NFL, quite frankly. Like the safety, the importance of safety has diminished greatly. And the value of slot corners has gone up because everything is the quick passing game. It's get rid of the ball in 3 seconds or less. It's the 3-step drop, ball is out. Everything is 5 to 10 yards, it seems like. And so Ramsey is going to offer a lot more benefit to the Steelers in that regard. Now, maybe if the NFL were to switch back the other way, you could argue that the roles would be reversed there. But I see him playing that type of versatile role for the Steelers. If you had to just put like a projection on how he's going to be, like what kind of role he's going to play, what would you say?
I think assuming Darius Slay is actually capable of holding up for another year at outside corner, I think we see a lot of slot reps from him, especially early on. I think it'll be easier to ask him to just kind of be a playmaking slot right away at this point in his career. I think he can still hold up at outside corner. I think he showed that last year, but I think his more impactful role the rest of his career, and maybe even safety at some point, ironically, and maybe not this year, but at some point, will be as more of a slot safety hybrid type of player, guy who comes down, roams around in that area of the field. So that's what I assume it's going to be. But I think going back to Minkah for a second, I think because your point about him not being worth the contract is 100% correct. But I will say, to the credit of Minkah, I don't think it's necessarily that he's a much worse player than he was in his prime. I think it's just that version of him is no longer able to be shown because the Steelers are basically like, well, we don't trust our corners to hold up long term at any position. Really, even Joey has his issues. We just need someone to keep the top on the defense, right? We need someone to allow this defense to not give up huge plays and to give our guys a chance to make plays in the red zone and in the middle of the field. He's not able to be aggressive. Like, he's not able to make plays. Like, I kind of view him and Jesse Bates similarly in the sense that once Bates went to the Falcons, especially, and they asked him to just be like a true, like, tone setter, a guy who's going to run all over the field, make plays constantly, like look for plays to make, you get the version of Jesse Bates now, who's arguably the best safety in the league. I think Minkah could have a similar level of play to that the past couple of years, but they didn't ask him to do those things because they were just afraid that if they asked him to, we'd get beat deep constantly. And they're probably right about that, but it just limits how much of an effect that he can have on the game. And if that's going to be the case, there's no reason to pay him that money if that's what you ask him to do.
Yeah, Shayne, I want to add a little bit more context to the contract in general.
Yeah.
Not all of this is Minkah's fault. And so what I mean by that is during the 2022 offseason, he signed a 4-year, $72.9 million extension that was good for $18.2 million a year. So you're probably thinking, well, why is the cap charge so high? Because the Steelers restructured that. They pushed money back. They pushed money back into that deal. And so it makes it more egregious than it otherwise would have been. If they would have evenly distributed that cap number,
be different.
I wouldn't have had an issue with it. But the fact that the money was pushed back and now you're taking a higher cap charge, more percentage of the team's total salary cap space when you have one interception in the last 2 seasons as a full-time safety during that time, it's just really hard to justify. And so I think you got to go back to a couple seasons now where Minkah has been a really great safety. I think he's just been solid since then. You don't pay that kind of cap charge for a solid player. So that's I just wanted to clarify that. And then going back to Ramsey, I agree. I think he's going to be that versatile chess piece in the secondary. I think he's going to, in nickel, he should be the guy that's in the slot all the time.
Yeah.
Slay doesn't have the experience there. Porter wouldn't be good with that because he's just not agile enough. He needs to be an outside cornerback. Maybe they use Trice there and dime as well. I think that it's intriguing to say the least. So you got your top 4 corners are big, long, physical football players who can tackle. And it's intriguing to see what this is going to bring because you go from last year having 5'10" Dante Jackson and a 5'9" Beanie Bishop, and you're replacing those guys now with bigger, more physical corners who obviously have much greater pedigrees in this league. It should be interesting to see where it goes. And we'll talk more about Darius Slay here, and I'll give my thoughts in a little bit when we grade these selections, the Steelers' biggest moves a little bit later in the show. I want to talk about Jonnu Smith here though, too, before we move on, Shayne, because kind of just snuck right in there.
Yeah.
With this trade.
Also Jonnu Smith. We're like, okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Also Jonnu Smith. And so, and I mean, reputation wise, Jonnu Smith was the only guy of the three that was that true Pro Bowler last year. Now, Minkah get it by default. It's a popularity contest.
Yeah.
I don't agree with how Pro Bowl voting is done.
Yeah.
Jonnu, you could have argued, was an actual deserving Pro Bowler. He had 88 receptions, 884 yards, 8 touchdowns. He was a good receiver for them. He was the most consistent player on that Dolphins offense last year, and it was the best year of his career. Now he's on the older side. He only has 1 year of elite production like that. Nothing else has really surpassed like 50 receptions, 600 yards. So I'd love to see that repeated. How do you think that the Steelers are going to end up using Jonnu Smith when you already have Pat Freiermuth and Darnell Washington?
That's the question that I think is maybe the biggest one, because I think we kind of know what again, we kind of know what Jalen's going to be brought in here to do. At least we think, right? Steelers could be weird and do something weird with it, but I'm assuming it's going to be mostly what we talked about. With Jonnu Smith, like, I'll go back to what I said when we originally talked about this, when it was first reported that the Steelers were interested in him. I'm not going to be upset with them adding a playmaker of any kind, because they just need more guys who can affect the passing game. But I'm not 100% sure at this point how to best operate with him and Freiermuth on the field at the same time, because neither of them give you much as a blocker, especially in line. Now, on the move, I'd say Smith is better than Freiermuth, but they're still, again, they're not super impactful blockers. And you think, well, Darnell Washington's there to do that. And it's like, okay, are you going to run 3 tight end a lot? Which, like, I'm not necessarily against, especially with the way this receiver room could end up shaking out outside of DK, but we'll talk about that too. But it's probably not what you're going to do all the time. So I do think, and if we can kind of get into players impacted the most by this, I do think one of Freiermuth or Washington will be impacted by this to some degree, because you can't play all 3 of these guys constantly. At least I don't think so. And even if they want to, it can only be done so much without limiting your options on offense. So I think that they obviously have a plan in place for this. I think that's why they brought him in. But I couldn't tell you 100% sure what that is going to be right now.
Yeah, is Arthur Smith about to come out here and deploy like the most 13 personnel that we've ever seen?
And again, like, maybe that'll work if that's the case, but I don't know.
Yeah,
if that's what
he loves his tight ends. That's no secret. He loaded up on them in Atlanta. His offense was not particularly good, so the strategy didn't pay out. Doesn't help when you don't have a stable quarterback situation, obviously.
Right, yeah.
So we'll see what it means, but I 100% agree with you. Somebody is taking a hit here, and maybe that's Freiermuth. Maybe that's Washington. I mean, Washington is clearly the biggest, strongest, best blocker, inline blocker, wide tight end of the 3. And so is he a guy that you really want to take off the field when he can act as an extra offensive tackle to help Broderick Jones, to help Troy Fautano, your young offensive tackles? I just don't know how they're going to make this work unless you're running these guys as you got an extra one on the end of the line of scrimmage. And you got another one in the slot between Jonnu and Freiermuth, vice versa. Like, what do you do here? And Freiermuth is coming off of another 60 reception season. Like, I feel like that inevitably has to go down now that Arthur Smith just got the guy that he's loved his entire career, from Tennessee to Atlanta to now, and they are reunited, and it feels so good, Shayne. And so I don't know what the target distribution is going to look like. I really don't. I would venture a guess that it would be Jonnu Smith, just based on their previous seasons, that gets more opportunity, because quite frankly, he was better than Freiermuth last year. And this is no knock to Pat. I think that Pat was efficient, especially considering the circumstances, not having the most ingenuitive offense, not having the best quarterback play, or the most willing to throw over the middle of the field. I thought he was pretty solid still. But Jonnu Smith is coming off the better season. And he's the guy that Arthur Smith clearly loves. And so somebody is taking a hit here. And I want to see Washington on the field still. Like, he needs to have a role in some way, shape, or form, because I think he showed a ton of promise last year, and it'll be a little bit discouraging if he just gets buried on the bench now.
I think that's the issue, is that I think if you're going to have 2 tight ends only on the field at the time, I think Darnell has to be one of them most of the time, because if he isn't, then you don't really get any, like I said, any blocking elements. You don't get any ability as a pass protector or in run blocking. Like, you just don't get much of that. So one of Smith or Freiermuth is probably going to have less production than they would otherwise have. And I think that is okay, as long as you balance that out, and the guy that is, more effective that day, or the guy that's a better fit for what they're trying to do that week is the guy getting the targets. That's fine. I do think the funniest thing they could possibly do is, like, line up with, like, Washington and Freiermuth as tight ends, Smith in the backfield as a fullback, and then just DK out there as the only receiver, and just like do weird stuff with that. That'd be fun. But I can
Yeah.
see John has done stuff like that before as like an H back. So like I don't know how it's going to work. I am glad to have somebody else who was again just a Pro Bowler as an offensive playmaker, mostly for what he did as a receiver. I am okay with that. I do just wonder how it's going to work out ultimately. So.
Yeah, and that's fair. Yeah, get Jonnu running a Texas route out of the backfield.
Yeah, there you go. That'll work.
I mean, when you look at it in terms of finances, like the Steelers gave Smith that pay raise, $12.5 million for this year. But you look at last offseason, Pittsburgh handed Pat Freiermuth a 4-year, $48.4 million contract extension. Now, maybe in hindsight, if they had known that that Jonnu was going to be as good as he was and he can come back with Arthur Smith, maybe they wouldn't have done that. But can you justify paying that much money? Can you justify paying $12 million a year for a backup tight end? Like the Steelers have so much resources overall and money invested into their tight end room. They've got one of the most expensive tight end rooms in the NFL. All of a sudden, the price you're paying between Jonnu Smith and Freiermuth would buy you any tight end in the NFL, assuming that you could get them. So that's what makes it interesting. Like you better use these guys often if you're going to keep both of them. And Shayne, I would ask, does this make a Pat Freiermuth expendable? Like, would they consider trading this guy, or do they just want to keep the depth because this is Arthur Smith and he loves 3 tight ends?
I think because Jonnu isn't a long-term solution, I don't think they'd look to move Freiermuth at this point, even if Smith would technically be like the starter. And I don't really know how that's going to work out either. Like who's going to be the starter, who isn't, doesn't matter. All I'll say is that if the 3 of them, mostly the Smith and Freiermuth, but 3 of them with Washington there, if they don't combine for at least 150 receptions this year, they didn't use them properly, in my opinion. Like you're not getting what you need out of them if you don't combine for about 150 catches. Because you could look at like 60-ish for both of Smith and Freiermuth and 20 or 30 for Watt. Like I'm fine with that. Like I think you probably use both of them effectively if you get there. If you don't, I'm just going to wonder what the point of any of it was, right? That's just kind of where I'm at with it. So again, I don't dislike this, and that's kind of the problem. We'll talk about this more in depth once we get to how we grade each of the acquisitions, but like it's more so just confusing than bad, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and you can never have too many good skill players, obviously. And just in case you were wondering what it would look like in terms of finances, if the Steelers were to trade Pat Freiermuth, I think it's very unlikely. But you'll probably get teams asking. I mean, they're not oblivious to their tight end depth all of a sudden. The Steelers would save $10.785 million and only take a $2.1 million dead money hit if they traded Pat Freiermuth. And so there's a cap savings there. Now, what do you use it on? I don't know. Unless that goes towards the TJ Watt extension, whatever.
Maybe.
But they're unlikely to, even when they get Watt extended, they're probably not going to take a big charge up front. They're going to push it back like they always do. But it is interesting. It creates a super interesting dynamic. Shayne, I would ask about what other players were impacted overall by this trade. And obviously one of the big winners right now is safety Juan Thornhill, who suddenly finds himself after 2 bad seasons in Cleveland into a starting role with the Pittsburgh Steelers. I would think that this is the one position that the team is going to want to upgrade before training camp. Like, I just don't trust Thornhill back there. I think that he's allowed a lot of big plays. I just don't think that he's been very good. But he benefits from this, whereas a guy like Beanie Bishop, it's like you had your chance as a rookie, and now you're suddenly buried on the depth chart.
Yeah, I think those are the 2 names you have to start with. I think for Thornhill, he definitely is hoping that they decide to just say, well, we're just going to have you sit back there and like you're a good athlete. You can run around, just try not to lay anything. Like that's probably what he's hoping is going to be the case. Maybe the Steelers are hoping he can handle that. And, he's not going to be nearly as good as Minkah in that role, but can he do enough to at least allow the defense to function the way they want to? They want to get quick pressure this year. I'm sure they want to kind of force the issue. Hopefully there won't be many big plays to stop, basically, is kind of what maybe they're thinking. I would love to add a safety, though, for sure, that has a little bit more consistency, hopefully. I kind of feel like Justin Simmons was a little bit cooked last year, so I don't know if he would be the answer there. But, someone else would be nice to throw in there now. I will say Deshaun Elliott could be impacted by this a little bit because maybe they ask him to do some more of that stuff by default and you move him away from the line of scrimmage a little bit more, which I wouldn't like because I think that's where he's at his best. But I think he'll be fine either way. Bishop, though, you got to feel a little a little bad for Beanie because you're an undrafted player. You come in, you start a bunch of game, play a lot of snaps, and you look okay relatively, right? Like maybe not so much so that you couldn't upgrade there, but he's probably not going to play a lot if you look at this. He's not playing on the outside. We know that, so we'll see. Maybe he can be a safety. I don't know. We'll see. But
all right, Shayne. So then I would ask, who won this trade? I mean, you're talking about Steelers getting Ramsey and Jonnu Smith, trading Minkah, who was once great for this team. Obviously, the day 3 draft capital involved in 2027. Who would you declare the winner?
I think the Steelers win by default, almost only because they, one, got the best player, in my opinion, in the deal. They got a second player who should be very, effective for them, hopefully. And they didn't have to give up any serious draft capital. I think if this was, you sent a solid day 2 pick next year or in 2027 as part of this deal, maybe you get closer to, like, I don't know if it's necessarily worth that for maybe only 1 year for both these guys. We'll see. But I think considering they didn't have to give up much draft capital, it was draft capital in 2027, and they came away with 2 players here. I think you can comfortably call them the winners. For Miami, I get, like, you don't want the defense to be completely worthless. And if you didn't get somebody back who can actually play, you probably would have been facing that. So I get it for them, but not getting like a substantial draft capital for either of them and shipping them both off is tough to swallow, I think. So
yeah, it's the Steelers pretty easily. The Steelers are the winners of this trade. Minkah, like I said, it's impossible to justify that cap charge that he was going to have. And so they were able to unload that for a player who, again, has 1 interception over the past 2 seasons. Not that he couldn't have turned it around. It would have been so up Minkah's alley to turn and come have a 5-pick season this year. Who knows? But the fact that he hasn't been producing the splash plays with the cap charge that he was about to have, they got to unload him, bring in somebody who should be better for today's game in general. The quick passing game,
more impactful
in the slot, he's more versatile, and he's still a good football player. Like, I think even straight up, like Ramsey, yes, they're both of them have seen better days, but Ramsey's most recent play, I still think, is better than what Minkah's is. And then you throw Jonnu into the trade just to sweeten the deal. And like we said, that 2027 day 3 draft capital, swapping a 5th for a 7th, it's nothing at the end of the day. It's really, really minor. So I think the Steelers were the clear winners in this trade. What do you guys think? If you have your opinions on the trade, drop them in the chat below. Leave us a message here on Twitter to help us get seen. If you are a fan of the Pittsburgh Steelers and would like to support the Steel Curtain podcast, please consider subscribing to the Steel Curtain podcast on YouTube. All right, Shayne, we are about to grade the Steelers' biggest and boldest 2025 offseason moves and signings. And let's go chronologically here in the order in which they happen. And early in the offseason, back in, I think it was March 9th, the Steelers traded for DK Metcalf. Now, we're not going to hit every single addition that they had this year. We're going to do all the biggest ones. So let's start with the DK Metcalf trade acquisition. Shayne, I want to hear your thoughts overall on the trade now that the dust has settled on all these moves, considering what the Steelers had to give up, which was a 2nd-round pick, had to turn around and pay him a contract. How you were feeling then might be different from now, and that's another reason why we're doing this. Give us a grade for the DK Metcalf trade.
I think had they done this and then kept George with no intent of signing him past this year, which is probably what would have happened if they didn't trade him, I would have had this as like a C. I really don't like the move. I don't think DK is worth the money they gave him. I don't think the 2nd-round pick let me put it this way. The 2nd-round pick they could have used, which may have been on a receiver, might have been more valuable of a player than DK long-term, especially with the age factored in and the fact that you wouldn't have had to pay that player. So for me, it's just a really rough move. And then when you factor in trading George away, though, and they seemingly plan to do that, and you do get a day 2 pick back for that, I'll move it up to like a C+, B- range, where like you needed a receiver clearly because you plan to move Pickens, it seems like. Getting someone who at least has produced in the NFL, has been pretty consistent, can give you the big play threat. It does make sense. So I will give them a little bit more grace because of that other move.
Yeah, your reasoning is spot on, Shayne. I am going to stick with a C for this trade. I was not a big fan of this trade. I think that there were other options out there.
Yeah.
And even if you ultimately knew that George Pickens was not the guy that you were going to give a contract to, which I didn't want them to, I was scared to death about doing that.
Yeah.
Or if you knew that you were going to move on from him even this offseason, like I still think there were better options on the table. I call it the Steelers had to stomach the double gut punch of giving away a second round pick that is premier
valuable
draft capital, and turning around and handing this guy a 4-year, $132 million contract. That's $33 million per season. And so now Metcalf is one of the richest receivers in the league, and he cost you a second round pick. In comparison, Shayne, and I wrote an article about this early on as well. This was even before they had Rodgers, and especially true now they got Rodgers. Maybe you could have bid on Devontae Adams in free agency. Adams is a few years older, but he's probably the better, more well-rounded receiver still at this point in his career. Adams signed for $22 million a year. So you could have saved money and held on to your second round pick. Like, I just don't like any situation that involves trading for a player, high draft capital, and then turning around and making him instantly one of the highest paid players in the NFL at his position. I would very much argue that that's a bad strategy unless you're doing it for one of the very best players in the league at said position. And I don't believe that Metcalf is that. I think he's a good receiver. I think he's a very good receiver. I think he's a top 25 receiver, top 20 receiver, but not a top 5 receiver. And this is the type of move that you do for a top 5 receiver. We talked about a similar trade for TJ Watt. Like, this obviously won't happen. I want to preface with that.
Yeah.
But people are throwing it out there. What can you get for him? Some people say a second round plus. If I'm getting the same capital for TJ Watt, who is clearly a better, more impactful player than what DK Metcalf is, that just shows you that this wasn't a particularly great trade. They shouldn't have been willing to do both. Now, hindsight, of course, you can argue that with Pickens gone, Steelers made the right move trading for Metcalf. I just think that there were other options out there they could have explored, that could have saved them resources in the long run. Now, thankfully, because of the George Pickens trade, because of the guys that walked away, thank you, Dan Moore, for giving the Steelers a third round pick in next year's draft.
Eternally grateful for Dan Moore is hilarious.
Yes, and so and thankfully, the Steelers are still well set up for the 2026 draft. That is the saving part about all this. But I just don't love the trade in general because of how much they had to give up. So I'm going with a C here, sticking to my guns, my original thought. And I still don't love it in hindsight, knowing that you could have done something else to solidify the position at a lesser cost. Let's move on to Darius Slay, the free agent signing. And Shayne, tell us what you think about this. What grade do you have on Darius Slay?
I give it a C+. I think there's better corners available, younger corners who may have been able to be on this team for several years that were out in free agency. Now, a lot of those guys got pretty good money, admittedly. Like, you saw the corner market finally kind of catch up a little bit after years of it kind of being stagnant. But I think that if you get Darius Slay last year, this is probably more like a B+ because he was a very good corner last year, still at 33 years old. However, unlike Cam Hayward, I don't know if I'm willing to bet on a guy continuing to beat the aging curve now that he's away from an Eagles defense that was much more corner friendly, I would say, than the Steelers defense tends to be. Yep. I do just wonder if he holds up for a full season, right? And I think at his best, he's a better player than Dante Jackson was for us last year when he was healthy. So that's an upgrade over that. But I wouldn't be shocked if we get to week 6 or 7 and we have Jalen Ramsey playing outside corner most of the time because Darius Slay can't do it. And, there's been reports about some knee issues, potentially, things like that. So, overall, I think the idea behind the move is good. It's just, will you get the player that they're paying him to be? That's why I end up giving it a C+ instead of a B or B+, honestly.
Yeah, 1 year, $10 million deal for a 34-year-old cornerback. I would highly advise against that in 99% of cases. Yeah. We just saw this in 2023 with Patrick Peterson. It did not go well. Now, I would say that Slay is coming off a better season. He still shows more ability to play man coverage, but he's coming from a loaded Philadelphia Eagles team that gets 4-man pressure as well as any team in the league. The Steelers currently are not that team. They're not as innovative. They're not as talented, quite frankly, as the Eagles are. And now Slay is another year older. Yeah. We've seen so few success stories of 34-year-old cornerbacks in the NFL in general, like in
Yeah.
the Super Bowl era. And oftentimes when you get to this age, you're transitioning to free safety. You're doing something else.
Or you're like a
If
slot
you were
player
once a
or
great corner,
something.
yeah, you're doing a different role because you need so much speed, quickness, reaction ability. And I just don't know if Slay's going to have that anymore. If you had asked me 4 or 5 years ago, of course I'd get excited about having Darius
Mhm.
Slay, but we're talking about a player who could at any given moment could just fall off a cliff and be
Yeah.
a player that is just flat out benchable. I hope that's not the case for him. Now, the best thing that I liked about this was that he was cut by the Eagles, so he did not count against the team's
Yes.
compensatory formula.
That does help as well.
That's the only thing that helped me get on board with this, but I'm giving this a D+ because I think that
Fair.
you're going steep with the money. The free agent cornerback class was good, and there were that was one of the best positional group classes available in free agency this year. There were Byron Murphys, there were guys that could have been options. Now he got tagged, I think, or signed back, but there were options out there the Steelers could have explored to fill that need, and they chose to go old. They chose to go expensive on a 1-year deal. Just again, it's another stopgap option for maybe a season, and maybe you're not even getting that. So I'm going D+ here, and I'm just not thrilled about that. So I got my 2 worst ones out of the way, Shane. We're gonna get better from here. So I'm not just being a Debbie Downer. Stick with us. Derek Harmon draft pick. Again, we're doing this chronological order. So now here comes the NFL draft. Steelers are on the clock. They pick Derek Harmon with the 21st overall pick in the 2025 NFL draft. Shayne, give me your initial thoughts on that, and how are you feeling about it now? Give us a grade.
I feel the same I did before. This is a pure and true A. I think A pluses are things where like you can't even believe that it happened type of greatness, but I do understand a little bit of why this happened. There are some reports about like shoulder thing or whatever, pre-draft, whatever. But this is the type of player that to me was a top 10 player in the draft, right? So this is a guy that can be a true 3-down interior defensive lineman, a guy that could potentially be Cam Hayward's replacement if he ever decides to stop playing, which at this point maybe he doesn't. I don't know. But this is the type of player you take at this spot and hope to get a 10-year career out of and a very productive one. We already know, apparently, that he's going to be starting, which is weird to say for a Steelers draft pick, despite being the first-round pick. They typically don't do this stuff. They normally make them kind of slow play a little bit. But they seem ready to put him out there, and I agree with them on that. I do think he's ready to go out there and make an impact. So to me, this is pure and true A, as much of an A as you can give.
100%. I'm going with an A as well. Derek Harmon was my 13th overall player in the class during my pre-draft process before I knew Steelers were going to draft him. Yes, I knew he was on Pittsburgh's radar.
Yes,
I didn't let that impact my thought on Harmon, which is you are getting a guy who's almost 6'5" with long arms, with freakish athletic ability, a guy that had 55 pressures as an interior defender. And if that ranked among power 4 edge rushers, it would have been 12th last year in college football. Like the fact that he was that disruptive from the backfield as an uber raw 21-year-old football player, like there's so much to love about this player's game. He's got a lot of cleaning up to do, very high missed tackle rate. All that stuff has got to improve. And I believe that it will. Those are things that you can work on. What you can't do is you can't get bigger and longer and
you can't teach
you are right now, like
6'5", 215 pounds.
The potential, the upside is all there. A+ potential and upside. It comes at a premium position, comes at a huge positional need. And you know that I don't even care about positional need as much. I tend to take the BPA approach.
It helps.
This so happened to line up
that
one of the best players available when the Steelers were on the clock also filled an enormous need, because outside of Cam Hayward, there's nobody there, hoping that obviously Benton ends up being a player that can stick around for a while as well. And we can talk about the misuse of him all day long here, Shayne. But yes, I'm giving a firm A grade to Derek Harmon. I would be surprised if he lets me down. I really believe in this prospect. Shayne, let's move on to the next draft pick, and then we're going to go back to some other signings and trades here. But Caleb Johnson, this is a guy that I watched a ton of from January, February, March, grinding a bunch of running back tape, knowing the Steelers had a need there, knowing that this was a phenomenal running back class, one of the best that I've seen. It was so deep, and Steelers can thank this deep running back class for Johnson ever being there with the 83rd pick. The Steelers picked him the 52nd overall player on Marcus Mosier's NFL draft expert consensus board. and they got him at pick 83. I mean, that was a steal of a deal. But what do you think about Caleb Johnson? Do you share the same opinion?
I do, yes. This was a very big win for the Steelers, in my opinion, being able to get Johnson in the third round, because I was worried when they traded their second round pick for DK. And I'm not going to factor that into my grade with DK, but it was something I was worried about, was that they wouldn't be able to get one of the premier runners in this class, because despite how deep the class was, the amount of teams that need a running back, especially with the kind of resurgence of the run game the last couple of years, was higher than ever, right? So these guys were going to go, I thought. And luckily, partially because I think Johnson, the thing with him is he's a little bit more specific in terms of his skill set than some of the other guys were in terms of how to best maximize him. And I think that did help kind of move him down the board. But he ultimately goes to a team that runs a lot of what they need to run for him to be effective, specifically outside zone run, toss, stuff like that. We know that that's what Arthur Smith wants to do. Might not be a better back outside of the obvious, like, Ashton Genty's the best back in the class. Like, you would rather have him, but like, not many guys better specifically at running what the Steelers want to run than Caleb Johnson is going to be. So I think he's going to be really effective right away. I don't know yet kind of where I fall on whether he should be the true like bell cow or anything like that, or how we're going to work that out. But I think he's going to be very efficient and effective very early.
Shayne, I wouldn't hand out this grade often, but I'm giving an A+ to the Caleb Johnson selection. Yeah. Like, I think that I had him in my 40s. The Steelers got him at 83. Yeah. I think that this is a guy who should have been taken in the second round. I think there's going to be some teams kicking themselves that they didn't do that. If you go back and watch Johnson's tape, like, I know that some people don't like his tapes because he's not that I'm like super elusive back, going to make you miss behind the line of scrimmage. That's not his game. He is a prototype wide zone runner. And when he gets out in space, he has speed. You watch him before the combine where he ran the 4.58, and that, I think that hurt the opinions of a lot of people there. A lot of guys thought that he was on par of a prospect with like an Omarion Hampton. And so the fact that he was being considered that high after the college football season, he had an extremely high broken tackle rate, the stacked boxes that he faced against Iowa. Like,
with Iowa,
it was, yes, they
you weren't worried about them throwing the ball, I'll tell you that.
No, they were a one-trick offense. He was that trick, and they still couldn't stop him. And I'm super optimistic about what this kid can be for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I'm giving this an A+. I really like Caleb Johnson's tape. I like it when the fact that when he gets out in space, he can long stride away from you. And so they desperately need more explosive plays. I think he's going to offer that from day one. And Shayne, I just put out there on Twitter, I know it stings a little bit because you like Najee. And I think that Najee was he was a solid football player in terms of what he was asked to do behind the offensive line. Nobody asked him to be a first round pick. It's just what he was. And so, but Najee had his longest run was 37 yards on over 1,000 carries with the Steelers.
Yeah.
I think that Caleb Johnson has multiple of those runs from his rookie season.
Yeah, it's very possible because, again, I don't know really how they're going to – and it's probably going to come down to training camp and, like, how these guys look and everything, obviously. But I don't know yet where I'm at with the split between him and Jaylen Warren. I don't know, like, how I feel about that backfield in terms of how it's going to shake out touch-wise. But if he gets enough touches, he'll certainly – not only will he have a longer run than Najee ever had, again, he might have several in his first season, right? So wouldn't be shocked by that at all. He's very much that kind of big play running back that we haven't had in a long time.
All right, Shayne, let's move on to the biggest overall addition of the Steelers offseason. Like it or not, it was Aaron Rodgers. Yes. We started to doubt a little bit as time progressed, and it's like, the NFL draft came and went. You have no answer. Yeah. Still no quarterback. Obviously, he ultimately ended up signing with the team. And kind of like as a last resort option, you can argue that he was better than the alternatives that were out there. But he is a 41-year-old, turns 42 late in the season this year. He admitted that this is going to be it for him. He's going to kind of disappear into the sunset after this season, if you will. And Shayne, what grade would you give to the Aaron Rodgers signing?
This is one of the toughest ones to grade because if you factor everything into like how the offseason played out, what the options were, like the alternatives, I kind of feel like I have to give it a B because I think he's the best actual quarterback in 2025 that was reasonably available. And the only caveat to that, and this is kind of my thing with this, is I know it would have taken more draft capital from this year, and you might not have Caleb Johnson on this team, and that would be difficult, especially with the way the running game is. And maybe they would have just added more guys and it would have been fine. But the only thing I wonder is if you're going to do the DK Metcalf trade, do you throw in the third and just bring Geno along too? And say, if we're really trying to win in 2025, you do that. Because that's what I probably would have done if you're really trying to go for it in 2025. Because I think Geno is comfortably at this point a better quarterback than Aaron Rodgers. So, and Grant, you would have had to pay him legitimate money. You're paying Aaron Rodgers, what, $10 million maximum or something like that. Like, it's not that big of a contract. It doesn't hurt you in any way for past 2025. So I think I'm inclined to still give it a B ultimately. But I would have been interested to see if that was on the table, whether they had that conversation about Geno. But
Shayne, I'm also going with a B here. We could nitpick at the direction of this team. Both you and I said maybe it was time to turn the page before they made all these big offseason moves, load up on even more draft capital, get ready. Thankfully, like I said, they were able to Omar Khan was able to find the line, to tread that line between I don't have to give up future draft capital, but I'm still making things happen and I'm making some splash. And so I think most fans would be satisfied with that. Now, you said it, like, in order for him to be better than that Geno Smith option, he's going to have to be the Aaron Rodgers he was 3-4 years ago. The pre-Achilles tear Aaron Rodgers, the pre-New York Jets Aaron Rodgers, because what he gave the Jets wasn't enough, and it won't be enough for the Steelers either. He needs to be a tier better than what he was over there. So if you're a believer that Rodgers can, at 41 years old, going to turn 42 this year, turn things around still, then you're going to like this move. I tend to land somewhere in the middle. I think he's going to be better than he was with the Jets, but obviously not the same quarterback that he was in his final years in Green Bay. And so I still think that it's ultimately going to be one that puts him in the middle of the pack at best this year. So I'm giving this a B. I think it's going to be enough to keep the Steelers competitive. Obviously, they tend to be competitive with whoever's at the helm. Rodgers, no different. It should be a little bit better, if anything. But I'm not overly convinced that he's going to suddenly revert back to that player that we once saw. So this is a B for me. Shayne, let's move on. We got two more here for you before we close up today's show. And those are the ones that we kind of discussed a little bit already, but we want to assign a grade to them now. Jalen Ramsey in the trade acquisition that involved Minkah Fitzpatrick. What would you give the Jalen Ramsey acquisition?
I think I'm gonna go with a B. I think that had they not given up Minkah and tried to keep this secondary as strong as possible for 2025 and still did this deal, I'd be more inclined to give it an A. But because they do send Minkah in response back, and we'll talk about the Johnny Smith part of it in a second, but because of the way the trade was structured and kind of how I think it makes the defense a little bit better, but not worlds better like it may have been if you have both of those guys in the secondary, I feel like I can't give it any more than a B because you're still paying this guy a lot of money. He's going to cost plenty of money this year, and if you keep him past this year, it'll cost even more. I do think that you have to factor that in a little bit, so I'll go with a B.
Yeah, I think that is completely fair, and I've got it at a B plus, just a slightly higher. I think that, like I said, I think the Steelers were clear winners in this trade. I think they're getting a guy at a more valuable position, who's probably been better recently anyway. But it wasn't a cheap contract either. Thankfully, you were able to ditch one maybe bad contract for another, and improve a little bit in the process. So I'm giving it a B plus. I like the aggressiveness. I know that, and I've had somebody argue with me about this before, and it makes a lot of sense. Do the Steelers have enough continuity? Like, are there too many moving pieces this year for them to be effective? And I think that that's a extremely fair point, and maybe that will prove to be the case. But maybe Ramsey can be more than just a one-year player. Maybe you're getting him for a couple of years, and maybe he'll still be good in 2026. I don't know. But I do think that at the very least, you are at least trying something new. You weren't getting your money's worth out of Minkah. Maybe you can out of Ramsey. And for that purpose alone, I'm going to give it a B plus. I think that it's more worth not sitting on your hands and actually doing something rather than trying to run it back with that same defense last year. And then finally, Shayne, with that same trade, the Jonnu Smith acquisition, kind of just like we said, thrown in there a little bit. What would you give the Jonnu Smith trade?
I have to give this part of it a B too, because it's one of those things where, like, yes, you get a good player. I don't know yet exactly what he's going to do. Like, I don't know what the direction is offensively. because we've heard different things and seen different things, and like it seems like they want to throw the ball more this year. That's why they bring Aaron Rodgers in. All that stuff's great. I don't know if you're going to be in an advantageous position to throw the ball a lot if you want to get all these guys on the field, at least under normal circumstances, normal play calling. Maybe Arthur Smith has this huge idea he wants to unveil in 2025, and it's just 3 tight ends. We're doing it 50% of the time. If that's the case, it will certainly be interesting to watch. I don't know that it's going to be good. So it's like I gotta have to stick with the B, because you get a good player for very little cost if you factor in like he was part of that deal and it was kind of like, it's almost a throw in. I'm okay with that, but I do wonder what ultimately it accomplishes, and I think we won't know that until several weeks into the season potentially.
Yeah, Shayne, because of the low cost, I'm still going to go with an A- here. Like I said, you can never have too many skill players. And it makes me wonder, like, what would the trade have looked like if he was not included with the Steelers? Would they just X the pick swap? Like, I don't know what that would look like.
Kind of, yeah. I think it might have just been like straight up, which would have been really funny trade. It's still a funny
that would have
trade,
been hilarious. Yeah,
really funny if that's supposed to. If there's no other moves except for those two.
So I do think that Jonnu was genuinely good on the Dolphins last year. Now, how the Steelers use them, I have no clue. But
that's the point.
I do know that they need more skill players. If you're going to try to make it work, you're making all these moves. The last thing you can afford to do is not have enough targets in the passing game. Excuse me. He at least offers that for you. So I'm going with an A- here. Any other closing thoughts you have here, Shayne?
Other than the fact that I hope this team is as much as I would love to see, I guess, more talent added, I also would like them to just relax for a little bit because training camp is coming up and we're going to be busy enough with that. Just try not to do anything else weird. Get TJ Watt figured out one way or another, and then that's all. That's like all I'm just if you do anything beyond that, I'm probably going to be like, maybe we need to just put Khan in a room for a minute and tell him he needs to breathe. Like, also, congrats on the contract extension, Omar. I'm sure you're definitely listening to what we have to say, but congrats on that. Certainly put his work in. He definitely earned his money this offseason. I'll say that much. So,
I think every Steelers fan, Shayne, between now and the start of training camp would like to see a Watt extension get done, which I don't think it will. I
don't think so either, actually.
It just feels so much like a repeat of 2021 where he's going to show up in the final hour and before getting that contract done. And I think that they would like to see the Steelers sign another safety, because that's a position that all of a sudden looks a little bit weak. But we'll see if either of those things happen between now and next week's show. All right. You could thank you for joining us today on the show. You can follow Shayne on X at Shayne Kubas. You can follow me on X at Tommy Jaggi. You can download the Steel Curtain podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Also check us out on YouTube or ask Alexa to listen to the Steel Curtain Steelers podcast. Please leave us a comment down below if you like what you're listening to. Please like the stream, subscribe on YouTube, and thanks again for joining us on the Steel Curtain podcast.